Dali lang.
Good day,
Nakikita po ba?
everyone. Yes.
Pasabi na lang po kung walang audio. Thank you.
So, for today, we will be good day, everyone. So, for today, we will be discussing the case of the late Karen Ann Kinlan. And together with me is Mr. Herson Garcia, and I'm Eileen Domingo. So, to start, next slide, please. Just to give a little background of the case of Miss Karen Ann Kinlan, she played an important role in the history of the right to die in the United States. She was born on March 29, 1954, and was adopted by Joseph and Julia Kinlan when she was 4 weeks old. She went to Morris Catholic High School, graduating in 1972, but did not pursue college. She started working at McCoy Ceramics Corporation.
The sound disappeared.
Ay,
Yeah,
sorry po.
there.
From her job, she began changing jobs and started drifting from her friends. In April 14, 1975, she went out to a party and started drinking alcohol. Her friends thought she was just asleep, but she never regained her consciousness. According to the investigation, it was found out that she took a combination of alcohol and tranquilizer pills, which caused her to stop breathing for at least 2 5-minute periods, which resulted in irreversible brain damage. She was admitted in a coma to Newton Memorial Hospital. In September 1975, Kinlan's parents, Joseph and Julia Kinlan, requested that she should be disconnected from her ventilator, but Dr. Robert Morris refused the request because he claimed that allowing a person in a persistent vegetative state to die was in violation of the professional healthcare standards. The Kinlans now petitioned the New Jersey Supreme Court for permission to remove the respirator. In November 1975, the court denied the request based on its contention that people have constitutional right to life but do not have a parallel constitutional right to death. But days after the New Jersey Supreme Court agreed to hear the Kinlan's appeal of Mayor's decision, bypassing the lower state appellate division. Next slide, please. So in January 1976, the state high court hears arguments on the appeal, and in March 1976, the Supreme Court issues a landmark 59-page ruling allowing the Kinlan family the right to have Karen's respirator removed and terminate her medical treatment. Based on the right to privacy, the court ruled that no compelling interest of the state could compel Karen to injure the unendurable. And in May 1976, Karen is weaned off the respirator at St. Clair's Hospital in Denville, but continues to breathe on her own. In June 1976, Karen is moved from St. Clair's Hospital in Denville to the Morris View Nursing Home. And in June 11, 1985, when from respirator, Karen survived for almost 10 more years, dying of pulmonary failure on June 11, 1995 in the nursing home. Because of this, the court decision was moved. Next slide, please.
Okay, so regarding the ethical issues, we'll be discussing them. So first is autonomy. So what are the ethical issues with the autonomy? So first is the right to privacy. So as the lawyers of Joseph Kinlan argue that extraordinary medical treatment amounted to an invasion to Karen's privacy. So they filed the lawyers of her father, Karen, held go to the court. So in the court had this interpretation for the right of privacy. that Miss Kinlan's interest in having her life support system disconnected exceeded the state's interest in preserving life. And so long as the medical authorities saw that there's no reasonable possibility that she would recover, as it was in the case, she was in coma. So the court ruled that her father and her doctors, her father, not her doctors or not the court, was the authority for the deciding fate on her behalf. So the court ruled out that no one could be held criminally liable for removing the life support systems because Karen's death would not be homicide, but rather it would be an expiration from a natural existing natural causes. It was the court suggested that respirators could be considered ordinary care for a curable patient. However, it can also be considered as extraordinary care for irreversibly unconscious patient. So another one issue is the patient's autonomy. So patient's autonomy was completely compromised on this case as Karen's was not able to have her can have her decision. So it was really compromised. The doctors were have to decide for her and the family. So it was very, very much compromised. So there's an issue on that as well. Another one is the healthcare providers should always weigh the possibility of the patient of being want to be safe or be not safe. Okay, so that's another issue as it was the doctors did not allow the removal of the life support at first until the court has a decision. So next slide. So let's go to the ethical issues on justice. So an issue in justice is that even if death is thought imminent, the ordinary care owed to a sick person cannot be legitimately interrupted. So there's this issue that even if death is there, the ordinary care owed to the patient should not be stopped, should still be given. Another one is discontinuing the procedures that are burdensome, dangerous, extraordinary, or disproportionate to the expected outcome. So when you discontinue a medical procedure that is not proportionate, disproportionate to the expected outcome, such as in this case, so we have the discontinuing medical procedures that has been done, and then there's this disproportionate outcome of dying. So, however, in this case, the dying would be expiration from natural causes. And as it was ruled out, it's because there was this a case when their father was interviewed. So the father said, Mr. Kinlan said in an interview that Karen is not feeling any pain or anything. However, they wanted to remove the respirator as it was causing her pain. So another issue here is there was no moral obligation to continue the extraordinary means to sustain life when there was no realistic hope of recovery. So that is another issue. So next issues. So issues on non-maleficence and beneficence. So first issue is Karen already, because the medical personnel mission here is to have the patient die a good death. Another one is the doctor's duty is to preserve life. And that is not anymore, if that is not attainable, the duty is to ease pain and suffering. That's why the parents, as they have seen, they wanted the respirator to be removed as they saw it. It was causing Karen's. That's for the ethical issues.
Okay, so let's proceed to the developments from the case. The case led to the requirement that all hospitals, nursing homes, and hospices have ethics committees. So another one would be the creation of living wills, or often called the advance directives. Living will is a written document that declares what life-sustaining medical interventions a person wants if she becomes terminally ill with little or no hope of recovery and is unable to communicate her wishes. It could also be a way of giving meaning to the doctrine of informed consent, which requires physicians to obtain the consent of their parents before beginning any medical treatment. Also, these are narrowly tailored documents that generally apply only when a person has a terminal illness. Although some states allow living wills to be used when a person is in a irreversible coma or persistent vegetative state. Take note that it does not apply to all types of medical treatment, but are limited to life-sustaining treatment and maintenance medical care. So in 1975, it was said that it reaffirmed a person's right to privacy by choosing the right to die, discontinue medical ventilation, and make decisions to receive or refuse any treatment. Next slide, please.
Going here, so another development from the case is that quarantine case contributed to the definition of the term persistent vegetative state. So there's a rethought of the definition of brain death after Karen's opinion, even after the removal of the mechanical ventilator. So let's go and discuss the persistent vegetative state. So in 1994, there's a multi-society task force that defined in more detail the persistence of the vegetative state. So the vegetative state is a clinical condition of complete unawareness of self and environment accompanied by sleep-wake cycles with either complete or partial preservations of hypothalamic and brainstem autonomic functions. So it's a condition that may be transient, marking a stage in the recovery from the damage, either severe or chronic, or either permanent. So vegetative state can also occur as a relentless progression of degenerative or metabolic neurological disease, or such developmental malformations of the nervous system. So then vegetative state was then diagnosed according to the following criteria. So first is there's no evidence of awareness or self or environment and inability to interact with others. Another is that there is no evidence of sustained, reproducible, purposeful, or voluntary behavioral responses to visual, auditory, tactile, or nauseous stimuli. No evidence of language comprehension. There is a intermittent wakefulness manifested by presence of sleep-wake cycles. It's sufficiently preserved hypothalamic and brainstem autonomic functions to permit for survival and medical risk care. So bladder and bowel is also bladder incontinence. There is a variably preserved cranial nerve reflexes, such as the pupillary, oculocephalic, cranial, and the spinal reflex. So there is another development from this case. So there is on January 1985, the New Jersey Supreme Court, which was the same Supreme Court that ruled on this case before. So it's widened its standards to the right to die that all life-sustaining medical treatment, including feeding tubes, could be withdrawn from terminally ill patient as long as that is what the patient would want. However, even after this decision, going back to the case, so after this decision, the Kinlands family did not seek permission naman to withdraw the feeding tube. They said that it is not necessary to remove the feeding tube. And to remove the feeding tube, that's like saying that they are going to take charge again. And they already know what will happen naman if they remove the tube, the feeding tube. So they did not offer that decision. Okay, so those are the developments for the case, and that's all. So these are references, and that's the end of our presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The reporters, kindly show yourself, put on your videos.
Everyone.
Sino mga reporters?
Ako po, Doc.
Si Aileen. Sino pa? 4 kayo?
Dalawa lang po, Doc.
You're just 2 in the report?
Yes po,
Bali,
Doc.
may isa pa pong group later, Doc. Dalawa lang din po.
Dalawa lang din kayo? Kasi yung ibang sections, apatan.
Dalawahan lang, Doc.
Doc, dalawahan lang daw po kami sa section B kasi isang
Konti
section
lang
po
kayo.
kami na po.
Oo, okay. Sure. Sige. What is the main ethical issue in Karen Kinlan's case?
The main ethical issue for this case po, Doc, is for the removal of the removal nung life-sustaining po niya, respirator.
The respirator. Was it ethical to have proposed removal of ventilator in Karen's case?
It's unethical po, Doc.
Unethical.
Unethical. Opo,
Dahil?
yung proposal po. For the proposal po, kasi there's this proportionate outcome po na upon removal of the respirator, it can cause po na death of Karen, which is illicit po na yung proportionate po niya ng pagtanggal ng respirator is death. That's why it's unethical po.
Okay, how about you, Eileen?
Doc, with the initial po na parang upon reading po kasi, yun po yung tinag nila for the issue to be inappropriate po nung una. However, if personally po, syempre now that we have more improved ethical principles and other guidelines in the healthcare sector, I think it's not unethical po that if mas choose na po nila yung palliative care or yung bawasan po yung paghihirap ng pasyente by allowing na lang po yung natural way of parang hindi na po super mahirapan yung pasyente, parang ganun po, Doc.
Well, actually, the reason why there was an ethical dilemma to begin with is because of the aggressive resuscitation that doctors are prone to doing, right? So you know that more or less it takes 14 minutes for the brain to suffer from hypoxia, anoxia, and then you already anticipate brain damage. So the longer the period of no oxygenation because the patient arrested, the more you expect neurologic damage, right? So kaya nga, ang lagi kong tinuturo sa inyo, pag kayo na-assign na sa ER or if you should choose to do emergency medicine, parang unang-una, hindi naman tayo Diyos, di ba? Parang hindi naman tayo expected na bumuhay ng patay in that sense, di ba? So, kasi nga, when you aggressively resuscitate a dead person, you always ask yourself, to what kind of life am I bringing her back to? Hindi naman tayo kagaya ni Jesus Christ na pag nag-resurrect yung binuhay niya, back to normal, di ba, na walang neurologic deficit. Tayo, pagka beyond 14 minutes ng anoxic yung pasyente mo, ibabalik mo nga siya sa buhay, pero what a life, di ba? Parang, in fact, you're condemning them to a life of poor quality of life, di ba? Yun nga, dinescribe nyo what a persistent vegetative state is all about, di ba? Buhay, pero parang hindi buhay. Pero of course, I think in the previous lecture last week, I made it clear to you na even if a person has lost their capacity, like in this case for mental capacity and even physical capacity, they retain their inherent dignity. Hindi naman porke vegetative state yan, vegetable na at ituturo mong vegetable, di ba? So hindi tao pa rin yan, no? Na dapat respetohin at dapat kumbaga yung hindi nagbago yung value niya in the eyes of God and in the eyes of men. Hindi na nga lang siya functional, no? So ngayon, nangyari na nga, binuhay na nila, ganun ang nangyari. Ngayon, ang tricky thing there is, di ba I was explaining to you how you assess the ordinariness or the extraordinariness of the measures. It's not so much as are we talking about a ventilator or something else. Laging, if the benefits outweigh the burden, then that becomes ordinary, even if actually mechanical ventilator yon, no? And therefore, kung ang classification ng means na yon is ordinary, then it becomes obligatory. Kaya very important yung pag-weigh nyo ng benefits versus risk. Ngayon, kung halimbawa naman you weighed it and then the burden outweighs the benefit, then that is when you see it becomes disproportionate it's extraordinary, and therefore it becomes optional. Okay? So, kung in a particular case, tulad nito, ang nag-request actually ng ventilator withdrawal was the family of Karen. And the family of Karen was very, very religious. They're very Catholic, in fact. And they consulted their chaplain about the moral act to take, na parang magkakasala ba kami sa Diyos kung tatanggalan namin siya ng ventilator. So yung assessment ng chaplain is, since ang pangit-pangit talaga naman ng prognosis, no? Then parang bottom line, kaya kasi siya buhay, ang tinamaan kasi is the cerebra sa cerebrum, right? Hindi na-hit kasi nung damage. Lagi naman sa persistent vegetative state, hindi kasi na-hit yung brain stem, which controls the cardiorespiratory function. So, kahit na sirang-sira na ang front lobes mo, cerebrum mo, hindi tinamaan ang base ng brain, no? Then hihinga at hihinga yan. At magko-function yung heart niya. So the cardiac and the respiratory centers are intact, no? And it's autonomic, whereas the cognitive functions are damaged. So no awareness of self, no awareness of the environment, no? So in the mind of the Kinlan, in reality, if the patient was not revived, she would have died talaga. Yun naman talaga yung katotohanan eh. Kaya lang naman siya nabuhay kasi pilit siyang binuhay ng mga doktor. And yun na nga, kaya lang naman siya humihinga ng kusa dahil dun sa intact yung brainstem niya. So, the way to do it is kung kailan seriously ill yung pasyente and the doctors think that the prognosis is poor and the measures are extraordinary, that's when you withdraw life support. Hindi yung buhay na yung pasyente, walang ibang problema, tsaka mo tatanggalan ng life support. Talaga ang dating noon, to all intents and purposes, para kang pumatay ng tao, di ba? So, kumbaga, when you remove life support, when the patient is really at the brink of life and death, then you might say, the one that really killed the person is the illness. Kaya nga ang tawag dun is allow natural death eh. Di ba? Talaga namang mamamatay siya kung hindi mo lang sana siya kinabitan ng ventilator. Di ba? Makina na yon. Obviously, artificial talaga kasi makina nga ang huminga. Ang tricky thing lang sa pasyenteng to, okay, inapprove na nga na ethical naman na tanggalan siya ng ventilator kasi the doctors and then the chaplains deemed that the prognosis was poor and the measures was extraordinary kasi nga the burdens outweigh the benefits. Kasi marami din naman, di ba, I explained to you all the complications of putting a patient on ventilator, di ba? Parang ventilator associated pneumonia, barotrauma, you have to sedate the patient, di ba? Yung mga ganon. So, ang dami naman talagang complication or kung hindi mo isa-sedate, itatali mo sa rail kasi nga normally tatanggalin nila yan, mga ganyan, nagwawala. So, okay, so they deemed it extraordinary. So that's why it's optional and therefore they removed it. Pero lo and behold, when they removed the ventilator, nabuhay naman yung pasyente. Ibig sabihin, humihinga nga kasi siya ng totoo. So kung gano'n ang mangyayari, then let it be. Di ba? Tinanggal mo na yung ventilator, buhay ang pasyente. Therefore, alagaan mo. Hindi naman porke, ay nabuhay, halika, tuloy-tuloy na lang din natin. Iba na yon. Euthanasia na talaga yon when you, for example, inject lethal drug to induce death in this particular patient. Okay? So, klaro? So, meaning, it was not unethical for them to have extubated the patient and removed the mechanical ventilator because when the attending physician, in consultation with the chaplain, deemed that the prognosis was poor and the means extraordinary, therefore, you have the option to remove it ethically. As long as you make sure that the ordinary means of life support continues, no, meaning food and water, diba? And then the care proper to a dignified human being. Okay? Yun nga, yun, keep them warm, turn them so that they don't develop bed sores, diba? Yun. Tapos since they are entirely dependent for activities of daily living, syempre yung bowel and bladder incontinent yan. So syempre, lilinisan mo yung pasyente. Do you get my point? So yung mga ordinary means of life support have to continue. They just remove the extraordinary means of life support. Kaya, as I said, in any ethical decision making, it has to be a case-to-case basis. Hindi yan dikahon na ang removal ng ventilator unethical or ang removal ng ventilator ethical. It's always a case-to-case evaluation. And what will determine the case is the prognosis and then whether the benefits outweigh the risk or the risk outweigh the benefit. And usually, para hindi mabigat, it should not be just one doctor deciding. You consult many other colleagues. If you're still in doubt, you can consult the bioethics committee about the right way of proceeding. Tapos yun na nga, in this particular case, since Catholic yung pasyente, they consulted also the chaplain. Tama ba itong ginagawa namin o pumapatay kami ng tao, kasalanan sa Diyos? So hindi naman. Klaro? Is that clear, Harrison?
Yes po, Doc.
Okay, so hindi siya dekahon. Dapat aaralin yung merits of each particular case. Sige. Next reporter, please.
Thank you po, Doc.
Okay.
Can you hear na po yung video?
Play lang.
Sino ba?
Walang sound.
You have to share the sound.
Try mo mag-unmute lang, then play.
Share ko, I unmute. Wala, ayaw.
Hindi, when you ka
share
muna,
muna.
yung share screen, pag nag-share screen ka, i-click mo yung nasa bottom left na nakasulat share sound. Nakita mo yon sa Zoom, dun sa sharing. Sa bottom left ng Zoom, nakasulat share
Starting
sound.
the brief introduction of the case. Nancy Cruzan from her car on January 11, 1983 when it flipped over. Nancy Cruzan suffered irreversible brain damage from a car accident, which resulted in her falling into a persistent vegetative state where she remains awake and alive, but without any higher brain function. 3 years after sustaining major injuries from this incident, Nancy was still in a rehabilitation hospital operated by the state of Missouri. The state is bearing the cost of her care. Hospital employees refused, without court approval, to honor the request of Cruzan's parents to terminate her artificial nutrition and hydration, since that would result in death. In the subsequent court hearings, Nancy's family presented the case around their claims to Nancy not wanting to live were she to be in a similar situation. This includes her sister Christy testifying that Nancy told her that she would not want to live such a life. For the court ruling in favor of the family, Judge Charles E. Thiel of the Jasper County Circuit Court affirmed in July 1988 that there is fundamental right expressed in our Constitution as the right to liberty, which permits an individual to refuse or direct the withholding or withdrawal of artificial death, prolonging procedures when the person has no cognitive brain function. Commenting on such, Missouri Attorney General William Webster would proclaim that Judge Thiel's ruling was not within the intended boundaries of the law passed by the legislature. And in November 1988, the Missouri Supreme Court ruled 4-3 to overrule the lower court. The court reasoned on the foundation that the living will laws allow the withdrawal of artificial life support systems when there was clear and convincing evidence to suggest the hopelessly ill would want to end their lives. The overturning was appealed by the attorney of the Cruzans and was heard by the United States Supreme Court. In a 5-4 decision, The court ruled on the 25th of June 1990 the court would not overturn the Missouri law that kept Nancy alive. After the state of Missouri withdrew from the case, it was ruled that her intent was clear and she wanted to die, and thus the feeding tube was authorized to be removed. After nearly 8 years, the family won the case. Nancy's tube was removed and she died 12 days later on December 26, 1990. The Cruzan case was the first so-called right to die case to be reviewed by the United States Supreme Court. Now let's proceed with the bioethical issues involved in Nancy Cruzan's case. First is respect for autonomy. In Nancy's case, there was no advance directive, but the family and many of her friends felt they knew her wishes. Advance directive is done by a competent adult patient. He or she may, in advance, formulate and provide a valid consent to the withholding or withdrawal of life support systems in the event that injury or illness renders that individual incompetent to make such decisions. The document includes allowances or cessations for resuscitation and life support. There wasn't anything written to prove that Nancy would want to withdraw life support. The burden fell on the family to prove that Nancy would want, since Nancy was clearly unable to do so from a vegetative state. Second is the principle of beneficence. Beneficence means to do good. It is illicit to suspend the means of survival of patients even there is a bad prognosis. At the hospital, Nancy was put on ordinary care life support, which involves a feeding tube and hydration. Even if death is thought imminent, the ordinary care owed to a sick person cannot be legitimately interrupted. Third is the principle of non-maleficence. Non-maleficence means to do no harm, to prevent, to remove, or not to risk harm. It is related to the right not to be killed. When Nancy's parents requested to have her removed from life support, her doctors refused as they were just giving her the basic needs, which is food and water.
So, in line with the principle of non-maleficence, it is important to weigh in if the benefits of withdrawing life-sustaining treatment outweighs the burdens. It is essential to assess if there will be hope for recovery, what will be the life of the patient. It is important to realize that ongoing treatment becomes burdensome if the patient's condition does not improve. Next is the principle of justice. In medical ethics, the principle of justice relates to the fair and equal sharing of health resources. Medical professionals should make the most of the resources at their disposal and offer patients equal opportunities in accordance with the principle of justice, which calls for treating everyone in the community fairly. Even though the survival rate is low in this case, Nancy Cruzan was given life support for the entire 7 years. She had been in vegetative state for nearly 7 years also. So this caused her brain to atrophy, which is irreversible, progressive, and caused brain damage. The principle of justice is constrained by the administration of scarce life-sustaining resources because those resources could be better used to save others who have a chance of survival. In order to allocate resources to patients who need them, healthcare providers must weigh their options and be aware of actions that may help one person at the expense of another. So let's proceed to the contribution of the case to the bioethical education. So in 1991, as a result of the Cruzan decision, the federal government enacted the Patient Self-Determination Act that requires hospitals, nursing facilities, hospices, home health care programs, and health maintenance organizations to inform patients about their right to make forward-looking care and treatment decisions through the use of advanced directives. So what is advanced directives? So advanced directives, these are document that outlines what medical interventions the person would want and who can speak for them in the event that they cannot speak for themselves. So there are types of advanced directives. First is the living will. It is for the articulation of the patient's preference to withhold or withdraw life-sustaining treatment in the face of terminal disease. So next is the durable power of attorney, or the DPA. It is an advanced directive that patients in many states can designate an agent to make healthcare decisions for them if they became mentally incapacitated. So what should be the primary care physician's position on discussing advanced directives? So such a decision will depend on whether the patient under consideration is presently incompetent or competent. So if the patient is competent, it seems prudent to advise him or her to consider executing an advanced directive like the living will and a DPA. So that's all for this case. Here are our references. Thank you for listening.
Okay. Ayan, Kylie, I can see you. So it's Marika and Queenie. Okay.
Yes, po,
sige. So was it ethical for them to have removed the NGT? Well, is it an NGT or a PEG? A PEG, no? PEG. Was it ethical for them to have removed the PEG in Nancy's case?
Doc, it's unethical po.
Dahil
yung PEG tube po is ordinary means. Sabi niyo nga po kanina, it's the obligatory, and yun na lang po yung bumubuhay dun sa...
How about you, Marika?
Doc, i-add ko lang po dun sa answer ni Queenie. It is unethical also po for me kasi wala rin pong advance directive si Nancy po to withdraw yung life support po.
Tricky ang advance directives na yan. Kaya nga mas maganda kasi pagka ang advance directives kasi iba siya dun sa mga form natin sa hospital. Yung forms natin sa hospital, strictly speaking, hindi siya advance directives kasi ang advance directives are legal document. It's like a will. You make a will, buhay ka pa, malakas ka pa, bata ka pa, na, di ba, yung will, usually may pamamanahan ka, saan mapupunta lahat ng kayamanan mo, yun yung usual na will, no? Living testament, no? Pero yung living will na sinataw, at of course, obviously, the usual will that we understand, it will only take effect pag namatay na yung tao, right? Ang living will kasi, buhay ka pa, obviously, at it will take effect, buhay ka pa rin, kaya lang, you're no longer in a position to make decisions and to speak up for yourself. So that's why, way ahead, sinasabi mo na, gusto ko to, ayoko to, ganyan. So, klaro, specify mo, ikaw bahala, ayoko ng NGT, ayoko ng PEG, ayoko ng intubation, ayoko ng CPR, ayoko ng dialysis, lahat, sulat mo. Pero mas maganda palagi, okay lang na isulat mo lahat ng gusto mo o ayaw mo, mas maganda, officially mag-appoint ka ng surrogate decision maker who knows you through and through. Hindi lang yung sa tingin ko, ganito. Talagang kilala ka niya. Alam niya yung gusto mo, alam niya yung ayaw mo. Okay? So, most of the decision maker, at least in the Philippine setting, is the nearest of kin. Diba? So, yung pinaliwanag ko sa inyo, kung married yung asawa, kung sakali naman at may hindi competent yung asawa, yung mga adult children, kung bata naman yung parents, tapos kung may mga kapatid, adult siblings, ganyan. So, yun yung usual hierarchy of decision makers in the Philippines. Pero kung may gusto ko pang i-appoint na surrogate decision maker na hindi nearest of kin, it's really up to you. Halimbawa, your best friend who may be a lawyer, siguro mas gusto mo siyang, since best friends kayo, kilalang-kilala kayo, kababata mo siya, alam na alam niya yung gusto mo, pwede mo din siya i-appoint na surrogate decision maker. And that's all That's what we call a durable power of attorney. Siya ang magiging decision maker ko when I'm no longer capable. And specifically for healthcare. Okay? So ngayon, in her particular case, walang written advance directives pero kine-claim ng family members that she has verbalized. And actually, sa totoo lang, sa Filipino setting, sino ba naman talaga ang nagtitake ng trouble gumawa ng written advance directives, di ba? So, kasi nga, hindi tayo ganun, hindi tayo legal-minded di ba? Pero alam din naman natin na may mga bilin-bilin din naman ang mga tao, di ba? Parang, minsan, hopefully, hindi naman pabiro, pero minsan sabi mo, basta ako pag ganyan ang position ko, pagka vegetable na ako, ayoko ng ganyan, ayoko intubate mo ako, ayoko ng dialysis, ayoko ng ICU admission. So sinabi mo yun sa mga kamag-anak mo, hindi lang siguro once, several times, ulit-ulit. So nag-stick sa mind nila na talagang bililin mo sa kanila na ayaw mo. So that makes the decision making easy kasi narinig nila sa'yo, may mga witnesses, hindi nga lang nakapag-draft, nakapag-execute ng living will. And that remains valid kasi sinabi mo yung gusto mo diba? Parang ganyan, no? So, of course, lagi naman, may possibility naman na kahit sinabi natin yun, nagbabago pa rin ang isip natin. Lalo na mga babae, sinasabi nga nila pa iba-iba yung isip, no? Pero syempre, may basihan ka kung bakit mo pinipili ang isang bagay o ayaw mong piliin ang isang bagay. Usually, hindi naman yan spur of the moment decision na type ko lang, di ba? Or wala lang. Usually, may reason because you don't want to be tied to a machine. You don't want to be a burden to your family members because it's so expensive also to be on life support, etc., etc. So, having said that, no, na like she has expressed wishes claimed by the family that she would not have wanted to live in a persistent vegetative state. That really is something that the doctors and the legal system has to consider kasi yun yung autonomy ng pasyente na, because part of autonomy is all patients have the right to refuse treatment even if sa tingin natin mga doktor hindi tayo agree kasi feeling natin kaya pa nating buhayin yung pasyente, pero kung ayaw ng pasyente obviously hindi natin pwedeng pilitin, 'di ba? Lalo pa nga at yung pagkabuhay na mangyayari sa pasyente is such poor quality of life kasi she's persistent vegetative state, no awareness of self, no awareness of environment, nothing. Parang buhay pero hindi buhay. Alam mo yon, yung hindi ka nakakapagsalita, hindi mo alam na buhay ka to begin with, di ba? Hindi mo alam kung sino yung nakapaligid sa'yo. Wala. Parang kumbaga you're floating. Ganon. Iba siya dun sa locked-in syndrome kasi yung locked-in syndrome, hindi mo magalaw lahat ng buong katawan mo pero yung isip mo malinaw na malinaw. Yun yung mas mahirap, di ba? Ito wala talagang pag-iisip because the cerebrum is damaged. It's just that the cardiopulmonary tawag dito, control is intact because the brainstem was not affected by the illness, no? So, ngayon, ano dapat gawin? Pwede ba talaga siyang tanggalan ng feeding? If you will ask me, I will not do it personally because I will still deem it ordinary means of life support. Obviously, for someone with a severe neurologic damage, obviously, they have to be fed artificially, diba? Ala silang gag reflex Pag pinakain mo yan, magchuchok, ikaw yung makakamatay sa kanya, di ba? So obviously, hindi mo talaga pwedeng gawin. Tapos, ang problema kasi when it's about food, which as we know is basic to life, di ba? Ang peculiar kasi sa food, mararamdaman ng pasyente yung pagkawalan ng pagkain. Kasi right in front of you, makikita mo yung state of starvation and dehydration. Di ba? Alam naman natin ang itsura ng taong hindi mo pinakain at hindi mo pinainom. Diba? Mag-shrink yan sa mata mo, everything is dry, diba? Dry lips, dry skin, sunken eyeballs, yung how you describe dehydration pag nagtatai yung pasyente, diba? So syempre parang when you think about it, is that respect for human dignity that you allow a patient to literally degenerate in front of you because you have deprived them of food and water? Kasi yung may isang case na yung si Terry Chavez, they did that and everything was documented on national television. They saw Terry Chavez, who also was suffering from a persistent vegetative state, to be restless and moaning and groaning because, of course, she cannot express herself. She doesn't know what's happening, right? But she could feel the discomfort of being starved and dehydrated to death. Alam mo yon? So parang sobrang nakakaawa rin na parang hindi mo ma-imagine na, halimbawa, kahit aso at pusa yan, hindi mo naman ma-imagine na hindi mo na lang papakainin kahit nga aso at pusa pag may sakit, idadropper mo pa yan para lang mapakain mo, di ba? Bibigyan mo siya ng milk para lang mapakain mo, di ba? Yung pag may sakit yung aso at pusa mo, parang baby na dinadropper mo, ganyan, sobrang alaga, di ba? Pareho lang naman yun, hindi naman nakakapagsalita, hindi naman nakakaisip, di ba? Animal lang yun, pero ganun tayo mag-alaga ng animal, tao pa kaya, di ba? Parang ganyan. So, yun. So, kaya nga, pag food and water, para sa akin, ibang usapan. Ibang usapan kasi ang mechanical ventilator kasi lalo na sa third world, napaka-obvious naman na hindi kaya ng nating lahat na mag-sustain ng naka-mechanical ventilator ang bawat isang tao. Kasi a ventilator cost sa government hospital, 500 pesos ang rent per day. 500 pesos ang rent per day. So, magkano lang naman ang daily minimum wage, di ba? 400 plus lang. Di ba? So, kung ang kinikita ng breadwinner mo ay 400 plus lang, tapos yung mechanical ventilator rent mo ay 500 plus, paano ka nakakain tsaka paano mo papakainin yung buong pamilya mo, di ba? So, hindi din makatarungan na buong pamilya magutom, hindi makapag-aral ang mga bata, 'di ba? Masangla lahat ng ari-arian dahil lang sa persistent use of artificial means of life support, which is, as you said, burdensome, not only to the patient but also to the family. Ang feeding tube kasi, at least in the Philippine setting, kahit na gaano kahirap ng pasyente natin, halimbawa, siyempre mahal ang PEG, so kung hindi nila kaya ang PEG, NGT yan. So, ang NGT kahit papano, wala pa yatang 100 ang isa. Parang ganyan, no? Tapos hanggat hindi barado yon, sige lang, kahit dugyot na itsura niyan, pwede mo pa rin pakainin. Tapos kahit, lagi ko sinasabi, kahit sardinas lang ang ulam ng pamilya, basta meron kang blender and you liquefy the food, salain mo ng katsa para maging liquid na liquid talaga, maipapasok mo pa rin yan doon sa NGT at makakapagpakain ka pa rin ng pasyente. No, kahit nga na diluted na bear brand ang ipasok mo diyan, at least mapapakain mo pa rin, 'di ba? Kahit na gaano kahirap. So in other words, even for poor people, tube feeding is not that heroic. So, yun. So medyo pag ganyan, kung halimbawa you're members of the ethics committee, usually that's how we will explain it, na parang where we wouldn't be comfortable recommending the removal of water because in many ways, it is considered an ordinary means of life support. It only becomes an extraordinary means if, for example, every time you feed, sumasakit yung tiyan ng pasyente o kaya tae ng tae, di ba? Kasi nga, hindi ma-tolerate ng pasyente yung feeding, no? Or kaya naman may danger na mag-aspirate or mag-cause ng aspiration pneumonia, then again, that's burdensome already, di ba? Even if it's food and water, hindi niya ma-tolerate So, hindi ikaw yung pumapatay sa kanya, yung inability niya to tolerate food and water, that will end her life. Pero it's not because you deprive the patient of food and water. Is that clear? Do you have some clarifications? Anybody who wants to clarify anything about the two cases presented? Kung nahihiya kayo, pwede dyan naman ilagay sa chat box, ganyan. Pero okay lang naman kung you will feel free to ask. You have some questions, Eileen? Wala naman?
None po, Doc.
Okay. Sige, are things clear? Kasi nga, well, when you go into minsan, clerkship at internship pa lang, makakakita kayo ng mga ganyang ethical dilemma in real practice. Basta ang lagi kong pangaral sa inyo, kasi pagka-clerk at intern ka at resident, adrenaline rush pag merong dying patient sa ER, no? Yung gusto mong nagsi-CPR ka, ganyan, gusto mo nag-intubate ka kasi it's a skill that you want to develop in yourself. Pero before you put in that endotracheal tube, ask yourself very clearly, halimbawa, for example, maraming palliative care patients, meaning advanced cancer patients na nagpapanik yung pamilya, kung kailan hirap na hirap huminga, itatakbo nila sa ER. Pero advanced cancer, terminally ill cancer, no? With multiple metastases, brain mets, lung mets, liver mets, tatakbo sa ER. Minsan, may ibang doktor, they don't even take the trouble to ask what is the illness of the patient. 'Di ba? At ano ba yung gusto ng pasyente. So kasi kung stage 4 cancer, ang tanong, tapos kalat na, obvious namang dying, ang tanong, bakit mo gustong i-prolong yung buhay ng pasyente na alam mo namang you're also prolonging the suffering of the patient, right? Parang if it's already a foregone conclusion that the patient is dying because of the advanced cancer, right? So minsan yun yung takang-taka ko na advanced cancer tapos ini-intubate sa ER. Kaya ang layo yung tanong, ba't hindi nyo man lang tinanong? Gusto ba ng pasyente magpa-intubate to begin with? So, it's the duty of the attending physician, especially the medical oncologist, na pag alam mong stage 4 na yung pasyente mo, mag-advance directives ka na kagad. Tapatin mo na kagad yung pasyente na, mami, hindi magandang lagay natin. Bukas makalawa po kasi, baka dahil po dun sa kalat sa baga ninyo, mahirapan po tayong huminga. So, ang default po kasi sa ospital, pagka po nahihirapang huminga ang pasyente, nilalagyan po namin ng tubo sa bibig. Yung pong tubong yun, mahaba yun, tsaka matigas po yun, ipapasok sa lalamunan hanggang makarating po yun sa malapit sa baga at ikakabit po kayo sa makina at yung makina po yung hihinga para sa inyo. Kung sakali po ba at mangyari yun sa inyo, gusto nyo po ba na intubate namin kayo? Usually, pag pinaliwanag mo pa lang ng ganun, gumagana na sila eh. Talagang very, adamantly saying, no, I don't want any of that. Pero ang assurance mo doon, hindi yun yung parang, okay, kung ayaw mo, di patay ka, sige, bahala ka sa buhay mo. Hindi ganon. Kasi, obviously, we can still deliver oxygen to a breathless patient in a non-invasive way. Thanks be to God. Because when you're talking about intubation and mechanical ventilator, that's obviously an aggressive, invasive manner. But you can deliver oxygen through high flow nasal cannula, through BiPAP, through CPAP, through face mask. So marami pa namang pamamaraan para mabigyan pa rin natin ng oxygen. So it's not as if we're going to deprive the patient of oxygenation. Klaro? Kasi kaya sila nagpapa-intubate. Akala kasi nila, pag hindi ako pumayag ng intubation, hindi na nila ako bibigyan ng oxygen at papanoorin lang nila ako na hirap huminga. That's a misperception. Okay? Hindi ganon. Lahat ng nahihirapang huminga, we will relieve the breathlessness. Klaro? But in a non-invasive manner. Tapos, bibigyan natin ng medications so that they are comfortable as we try to address the breathlessness. That's what palliative care does, actually. Okay? We use opioids because when you use opioids, it will bring down the respiratory rate to near normal and therefore there's better oxygenation. And of course, at the same time, you relieve the anxiety kasi when you're so breathless, you're anxious, all the more you become hypoxic. So when you relieve the anxiety, mas nakakahinga ng maayos ang pasyente. Okay. So you don't have any more clarifications, questions? Sige. If none, we end this session. Thank you.
Thank you po,
Thank
Doc.
you po, Doc.
Thank you po,
Thank you po,
Doc.
Doc.
Thank you po, Doc.